You are a repair technician on Mars. You are an ordinary worker who does basically ordinary work, but in an extraordinary place, millions of miles away from home, both on and beneath the surface of an alien world. It's pretty cool. At the end of your shift, you receive a surprising message. A manual alarm has been triggered at a nearby base, and then a blackout. The base personnel won't respond to your messages, so you decide to check it out, see what's up. You travel across the barren, freezing, sandstorm-swept alien landscape, and then there it is, Fort Solis, one of the oldest research bases on Mars, like a black, dim hulk on the horizon. It looks pretty freaky. Communications are still totally silent, and when you reach the front door, you discover that the base has been locked down. Every door is sealed. No one gets in and no one gets out, except for you because you're an engineer, and it's your job to know how to work around these sorts of technical systems. Once inside, it becomes clear pretty quickly that something very, very wrong has happened here. The base is silent and empty, as if all of the crew have vanished. There is no sign of whoever tripped the alarm or who locked down the base. You explore the communal spaces, the crew quarters, the medical clinic, rifle through desks, hack computers, read private emails, and you start to learn about the individual staff of Fort Solis, who they were, what they cared about, their interpersonal conflicts. In their logs, you hear hints of some extraordinary material being extracted from the depths of the planet, of incredible research that has the potential to transform not just Mars, but Earth too, maybe the whole solar system. But you also begin to hear subtle hints of much uglier things, of a hideous spreading sickness, of rampant paranoia, of a conspiracy with unknown aims, of sabotage of critical systems, of rampant suspicion and horrifying violence. Slowly, you start putting together the pieces, connecting the hints, forming a clearer and clearer picture of what went wrong here. Was it an alien disease or an alien creature? Or is the true source of disruption something much more human, like a corporate or bureaucratic conspiracy? Or maybe just a lone homesick officer whose mind cracked under the pressure of interplanetary stresses? Or maybe it's all of these, or none of them, because this is Fort Solis, which the developers are calling an immersive cinematic adventure, which is a fancy way of saying walking simulator, but like a really good one. Fort Solis has one of the most immediately compelling stories of any game I've played this year. It reminds me somewhat of Dead Space. They both start with these ordinary repair technicians getting called into an extraordinary science fiction location, where things very quickly turn out to be far worse and far stranger than whatever you were expecting. Except where Dead Space is a bloody action horror game where you battle hordes of monsters, Fort Solis is a much quieter and slower-paced story-dense thriller, where the most frightening monsters are ourselves. Instead of terrifying, bloodthirsty aliens, what you'll find in the Fort Solis base are people. Just ordinary people. These characters are well written. They each have their own histories and quirks, their own ambitions, the things they care about. Their friendships and conflicts feel believable and genuine. This is a surprisingly emotionally and morally complex story. There aren't any obvious bad guys, or maybe it would be more accurate to say that everyone is a bad guy, except everyone is trying to do the right thing. The problem is that all of these characters have very different and very incompatible ideas of what is right, and when those conflicting ideas inevitably clash, the result is a horrifying disaster. None of these characters asked to be thrust into this situation. They're all just doing their best to deal with something that is beyond any single one of them. Even the worst and most frightening characters still felt very human to me, ultimately sympathetic. The lead characters are Jack Leary, an engineer voiced by Roger Clark, his fellow engineer Jessica Appleton, voiced by Julia Brown, and the medical officer Wyatt Taylor, voiced by Troy Baker. All of the voice acting in this game is extremely well done. which isn't a surprise considering that these are some pretty big names, and they're also helped by a strong script. The two engineers, Jack and Jessica, are super duper likable. Their dialogue feels much more grounded than the sort of quirky and quippy dialogue that's come to dominate so much of our media. They both feel very real. They're often being silly together, but not in a superhero movie sort of fashion, but much closer to how real friends behave with each other. You get a strong sense of their bond, and when things finally do start to go wrong, I felt genuinely terrified for both of them. I really cared about these two characters. Wyatt Taylor, the medical officer, is a much more complicated character. On the one hand, you're gonna hate him. You're gonna despise this guy, but you're also gonna feel really sorry for him. You're going to understand why he's doing what he's doing, and maybe, from a certain perspective, he's actually the most heroic character in the story. Maybe he's even kind of the true protagonist. He's the type of well-crafted character that I'd love to do a full analysis of. Because, like I said before, this is an emotionally complex story. There aren't good guys or bad guys, there are just ordinary people in an extraordinary situation. Fort Solis is definitely up there among the best walking simulator games I've ever played. It's at least as good as the Stanley Parable or Firewatch or What Remains of Edith Finch or Soma. If you like any of those, you should check this out. I really love these types of games, the kind that take the interactive, immersive storytelling potential of video games to its limits. Fort Solis advertises itself as being a high production value cinematic interactive movie, but that wasn't quite my experience. Instead of cinematic cutscenes or action set pieces, most of this game is made up of slow-paced exploration and investigation, with some light puzzle elements, which is great because that's much more what I prefer from this type of game. It's only cinematic in short bursts, but when it does get cinematic, it's really good. A great script with great voice acting, combined with great direction, creates some really tense, dramatic, and emotional moments. There are parts of this game that are going to stick with you for a long time. I was surprised by how much of the story you have to find for yourself. I was expecting it to all be told through cutscenes, but it's actually much more of an investigative experience. You will discover the story through the environment, just looking at the general clutter in offices or sleeping quarters. What can you tell about this character based on what you can find in her locker? The mystery and character motivations are revealed through emails and logs and journals. If you're not exploring thoroughly enough, you can miss big chunks of the story. That actually happened to me. I got to the end of the game and I was really confused. I had been expecting a character to monologue at me at some point to explain, "This is what's really going on," but that never happens. Fort Solis doesn't spoon-feed the entire story to you. I felt like I was missing a big piece of the puzzle at the end because I was missing a big piece of the story. I had to go back through and find some more logs, and then things made a lot more sense. This is a style of storytelling that I really like and that I think fits video games really well. People call this genre walking simulators, but a much more accurate term would be investigator simulator. To get to the story, you have to investigate the environment. You have to do a lot more than just walk through it to get the full experience. You have to think, you have to put the pieces together on your own. I have only two real criticisms of the game. First is that I wanted a little more from its story. Even after collecting all of the logs, the game's story is still pretty ambiguous in certain spots. It's hard to say anything without spoiling the story, but there are some things I wished that I had some more solid details on, so I could understand the characters' motivations better. I do like a certain amount of ambiguity in a story, but some things here were a little too vague for me. There are also a lot of side characters who are important but get very little screen time. A little more depth from or interactions with those side characters could have gone a long way towards making this a bit of a fuller experience. My other criticism is that these characters are way too slow, both physically and mentally. This game really needs a run button. I didn't mind the slow walking pace on my first playthrough, when I was happy to immerse myself fully in the atmosphere and take my time soaking it all in, but on my second playthrough, when I was trying to get to certain parts of the game as quickly as possible to find logs that I had missed, the slow walking speed felt excruciating. Like, Jack, my dude, a little more hustle would be great. Also, these characters definitely suffer from a bit of the same sudden onset stupidity syndrome that a lot of protagonists in horror and thriller stories suffer from. Like, guys, don't go into the dark and ominous lair of the villain without picking up a weapon first. For God's sake, at least try to defend yourselves. And why is one of you sitting on your lazy butt in a car on the other side of the planet doing nothing instead of coming and helping as soon as you knew something was wrong? Why not at least wait nearby so you can help as soon as something does go wrong? Why is this guy just ignoring all this fresh blood he just found? Obviously, someone is very badly hurt here, dude. Don't just walk by it. A certain percentage of this plot's problems could have been solved with a little more intelligence and a little more open communication. But with those relatively small criticisms aside, I really liked this game. The characters are fantastically written and masterfully voice acted. Troy Baker as the medical doctor is a particular standout. That character runs through such a range of conflicting emotions and motivations, and you can totally hear each one in the voice acting. Like, I hated him so much at times, and then at other times I felt so sorry for him. He is a great character. Fort Solis is an immensely compelling sci-fi thriller, a mysterious distress signal, an abandoned research base, an unexplained bloody footprint in the corner. But when you explore those depths, instead of finding monsters, you will discover a surprising emotional and narrative depth hidden underneath the surface. It's really good stuff.